here. Thanks for the introduction. That's definitely longer than I would ever allow anybody when I was on active duty to introduce me. But today I'm going to talk about, have a conversation with you. And yes, we're talking about resiliency, and I will let you know I'm going to talk about some tough things. I'm super transparent about talking about this subject. I was talking to the colonel in the back and said, hey, nothing today, makes me any kind of hero for being able to speak, and nothing makes you out there any less than a hero for not speaking about any stories or anything that's happened to you. And I'll be totally upfront that I came into this, this is not what I primarily do in my company, but I do this because of an A1C who actually lived in Philadelphia, just about an hour away from here, who came into my office every day when she was going through her own situation, her own struggles in life, and she was 19 years old, and I'm a brand new chief in the United States Air Force. And she looked at everything that was on my wall every day, all the things that we say that we're great, right? All of our stuff that we have, we've gotten from all over, and people saying you're the quarterly award winner, you're these things, and it taught me a lesson that day that she came in my office a couple of dozen times, and would do the right thing, and we would talk about our treatment team meetings and all of these different things, and never did I share a moment of who I was as Todd Simmons with this young lady. Never did. And I wasn't even conscious that I was doing this until my first sergeant called me and told me she tried to take her life. And I had to stare at her in a hospital bed and go, man, okay. I knew she was going through some things, but did I know what she was going through? And not only did I not know deeply what she was going through, why would she trust me to ever tell me anyway? All of those things started circulating in my mind. Why would she even trust me? Because I got all these chevrons? Did I build that connection with her for her to But do we really make the effort to make that the weapon system of choice? Do we really make that the most important weapon system that we have? And I don't think anyone in this room, just like me walking in and out of a room for months looking at a young 19-year-old from Philadelphia, mean any harm to anyone. I don't think we can wake up in the morning to do harm to each other, to not connect. I just think sometimes we have to go to the extra effort to understand why people matter and the strategic importance of it. How many of you know someone who got out after their 4 years? Everyone in here, right? We don't have a right to keep people. People come in and out of these doors of our institution partially because how they feel from the time they hit the recruiter's office to the time they hit our organizations to the time they have to make that critical decision about when I leave. And it's not our airmen. Talent is not just confined to our airmen or our new civilians. Talent is defined even to the colonel here, even to the senior master sergeants and chiefs in this room. Do I stay? Do I commit to this institution? And I tell you, the cultural importance of connecting is a strategic imperative. You hear General Brown, you hear Chief Master Sergeant Air Force Bash, I heard Lieutenant General Clinton speak at AFA recently when he talked about war gaming, and he talked about, if we were to do certain things tonight, we would be good, and some things we would not be good at against our peer adversary. We would win, and we would also lose at some things. I know that's the buzzword now, culture, peer adversaries, China, but let's peel that back for a minute. What's the difference between us and the difference between China? The true difference when it comes to talent. There will be high school graduations across this country in a few months, right? Here in 5-6 months. To get the top 10% of all of those high schools, we have to create a value proposition for them to want to come to us. To get the talent that's going to actually win wars, to actually is going to be innovative and creative and curious enough to take on the next generation of problems, we're going to have to tell that young man or young woman that this is a place that you will be nurtured and taken care of. This is a place that you can come, and for the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to value you. What's the difference between us and China? They don't have to do that. They can take their best and brightest and send them directly to the military complex. They can take their best and brightest and put it into their strategic plan, in their strategic imperative. They can do that. Their enticement is different. How do we retain the top 10%? Something I used to do as a career field MASTERClass functional is I used to look at my re-enlistment rates at every one of my squadrons against the Air Force average. And if one of my squadrons was 5 percentage points lower than the Air Force average, I would ask the question, do we value this as now a thing the same as we lost the aircraft? Because we were bleeding talent somewhere. And that talent is going to have to fight the future war. We can be naive and say that it doesn't matter who doesn't stay, and if you did your time, you can go, which is true. But we should be thinking about the people we have in our ranks today. We should be thinking about how we connect with them, how we are valuing them, because I'm not going to go in there, it's a whole nother brief I do, but when we talk about the last 18 months of the great resignation that we have had, what COVID has really re-engineered the workforce for the first time in 60 years. How are we going to retain that new workforce that now has a different view on expectations of quality, of value, of connection, of empathy, of curiosity, of my life and my time? And you might say, what does this have to do with a resiliency brief? It all has to do, it all wraps up into the same bubble. Because I can stand here and say, hey, I was 19 years old, I tried to kill myself and I came back. Anybody got any questions? Have a nice day. Yes, it's a story that I'll walk through. But the same reason that 19-year-old stared at me from a hospital bed is the same reason why 20 years before, I did exactly what she did. A breakdown of my belief, a breakdown of the curiosity, a breakdown of the connection, and a breakdown, most importantly, of the trust of the people who wore the same uniform that I wore. And I was 19. When those things break down, and when people's purpose starts to go into the red, things happen. They're fighting to stay. I looked at your mission statement, or what your, even here on your diversity and inclusion, and I really liked it. So I said I'll talk about courage, compassion, and empathy. I talk a lot about empathy, and we'll end today with empathy. And you can interrupt me at any time if you have a question, and we'll save some times. But I like this. But a vision and a mission without a strategy, it's just great words. And this is not a knock on anyone, right? I spent 25 years, 7 months, 17 days, and 90 minutes in the United States Air Force. And I loved every second. I don't give you the count because it was negative. I loved every second, even every pitfall I had in the Air Force. I loved that. It taught me something. But I will be the first to stand here and admit my first failure as a leader. My first failure is I went after climate and not a culture. My first failure is I tried to create short spurts of happiness for you instead of creating a culture that lasts beyond me. And when we think about those two things, and we use words like courage, compassion, empathy, those are embedded somewhere in a strategy to make sure that when everyone here is out of this uniform, it should feed into how I feel when I come through the first gate, through the gate of this base, how I feel when I go to the BX, how I feel when I go to the MPF, how I feel when I go to the med group. It should be how I feel is that this is a compassionate, empathetic place. So the thing I will tell you about visions and missions statements, if it doesn't have a strategy that makes, because guess what? We all see it. The youngest? Who's the A1C in here? No one? Got a couple of A1Cs back there. It takes an A1C 120 days to know if this is true or not. That's essentially what you have before they go, all right, And after that, they start creating their own narratives about what really it is. And I'm not just picking on the A1Cs. This is, if you get a new senior NCO here, a new officer here with their family, it takes about 2 seconds to realize, do we live up to this? If you get a new civilian who have never worked with the United States military, I used to be in AFMC, which is the largest MAGCOM of civilians, and I used to be in Air Force IMSC, and I used to be at Edwards Air Force Base. So I've had a great history with all of our great civilian counterparts. And one of the greatest things that I used to see is when my boss would go swear in the new civilians. Because they do. They take an oath just like we do. And if you didn't know that, they do. And I would love to see this to a brand new engineer that just got out of college and is going to come in and be an aeronautic engineer in the United States Air Force. They're going to forego this 6-figure salary to come work out in the Mojave Desert at Edwards Air Force Base and work on some of the coolest things that we have in the inventory. And they're proud. They're so proud to be here. And I always walked out of that room wondering, man, I hope if I came back and circled around in a year, that enthusiasm will still be there. Because we just told them this is our values, and this is what we value, and they're locked on to it. And they believe it. What if I came back in a year? We all can answer that question for ourselves sometimes. So what does this all have to come down to? I talk about this a lot, right? It's as simple as how you make me feel. How many of you are Chick-fil-A fans? All right, that's most people. How many of you are Popeyes fans? Got a couple of hands. How many of you believe that Popeyes has the better chicken sandwich? Like 5 of us. Honestly think Popeyes has the best chicken sandwich. I do. What do you think, O'Shawn? All right, you gotta go Chick-fil-A. I don't know how you get home. Uber goes to Philly Airport. But I will tell you, I believe Popeyes has the most quality chicken sandwich. I believe that we've been so psychologically, I want to call it brainwashed. We've been so used to not being treated a certain type of way in that level of establishments that the Chick-fil-A has given us such a feeling that we're willing to forego anything. We think the food is hotter, we think the chicken sandwich is better, we think the bread is fresher, all because I said your name 3 times. All because the consistency rate is over 95% that your fries are going to be hot, and that your bread will be soft, that your chicken will be plump and juicy. And Popeyes has probably about a 60%. Just facts. So how we feel, how many of you drive down the interstate and see this blue sign and stop based on the blue sign? What's on the blue sign? I know I do. I look at that blue sign on the interstate and I'll be like, well, I'll just do another 20 miles. No Starbucks. I'll start counting down the things that I'm not willing to go do. And my wife gets so upset with me all the time. She's like, hey, I want to stop and get something to eat. I'm like, she's like, but it was a Burger King there. Don't do it. You got 3 choices when you see that blue sign, and one of them better be a Starbucks. And we ain't stopping. But we really make these emotional connections to how people make us feel. How many of you have had a leader, boss, friend, peer that you just, you were devastated when you had to leave that installation with that relationship because that person just made you feel a certain type of way? Supervisor. I will tell you, I had a great career. 2 people influenced, 100 people influenced my life. 2 people changed my life. It's a difference. I used to offend, and I'll tell you about that later. I offended one of my chiefs one time because he tried to give me a great assignment. And I said, no, thank you, Chief. I'm taking the advice of someone who gave me advice 15 years ago, who I haven't talked to. Because that person had a change, had a situation of life-changing events in my life. Influencing somebody's life and changing somebody's life is completely different. How we feel. Chick-fil-A is changing your lives. Because you want that feeling of gratitude. You want that feeling of someone saying, I value you. And that's why you go there. We look forward to somebody walking into the squadron and being genuine with us. We look for it. That's a human condition that we have. We don't really know, and I talk about the superpower of empathy, which I'll get into in a little later, how much of a superpower empathy really is. And why do I talk about empathy so much? Because I talk about it, it saved my life. And I will tell you that we walk around life, this is how I feel every day. I'm just going to be honest with you. Might not be the words on the sticky. I honestly saw this picture, and this is how I feel. It doesn't matter what you see on social media. It doesn't matter what you read in my bio. It doesn't matter what you perceive that's on my wall. I walk around with 80% of these stickies floating around my life every day. And most of you have your own floating stickies around you every day. Regardless of who you are, regardless of your position in life, regardless of anything, we get up every day and life is weighted on us. It's the coping skills. It's how we connect with people today that changes and saves lives. It's how we become trusted partners and really believe in the words when we say, I got you. When we say courage, commitment, and empathy, we really know that that's true. These stickies still there, but they tend to become less intrusive in your mind. Because now I'm going to come talk to you. I'm going to go, hey, I got a problem, right? It took till I was a senior master sergeant to really become comfortable with that. To say, I need to take a knee. And whatever your consequences are, so be it. How many of you have worn a name tag similar to this? Let's be honest. We have, right? I used to walk around events. I was just at your Air Force ball a couple of weeks ago. And as I walk around, I got 400 people there. You know, as you mingle, this is like a visualization into my head how I communicate with people. I just don't see you in a nice dress or a nice mesh dress and all of these things. I'm wondering, what name tag are you really showing me and what are you wearing? Because we all are. And we become drive-by greeters, is what I call it. And I had to really become careful of that as a leader, to really get into my mind that I was meeting everybody. Because I went by and shook your hand, and I went by and gave you 2 seconds and moved on. Was I really meeting you? Was I really looking you in the eye? Was I really attentive to the person that was in front of me? The biggest thing people tell me is, I don't have time. You can save somebody's life in 2 seconds. All you have to do is be purposeful and meaningful about it. Whenever I used to travel, I used to go, I can't meet everybody, but man, I can connect with somebody. And that used to be my purpose every time I go out. I may not be able to meet everyone, but I can connect with someone. It's my mission every time I got on and off a plane. I got to connect with someone new. Because a lot of people we meet, we move on in our memory phase, and we might remember a certain attribute about them, but we have never met them. I try to show up where people meet me every day. And I won't leave till you do. I don't like just this superficial 5 things, and I'll tell you, most of us have 5 things, and I'm not going to embarrass anybody in here today, but I might embarrass Sergeant Baker in a minute. But 5 things. If you introduce yourself to me, you're going to give 3 to 5 things, and we're conditioned to do it. My name, maybe where I'm from, my occupation, my AFSC, maybe some kind of weird thing about either you like it here or you don't, or Alabama is the best football team in the country, which they're not by somebody's rankings. So, and yeah, I got Alabama socks on, so calm down. But we tend to not really want to give anything of ourselves, and that's okay. But we allow people to accept that, and we'll move on. Okay, Sergeant Baker told me where he works in diversity inclusion. His name is Sergeant Baker. His first name is Willie, and he's from here. All right, let me go meet someone else. Did you really meet me? And we begin to tell ourselves stories from this name tag, right? We begin to tell ourselves stories, and from those stories, we develop a whole lot of habits that probably are bad. And this is where I get really into, a little bit about what occurred and shaped my entire life. And I really look back on this entire career in the United States Air Force. It can be anything you do. I talk to corporations, it can be anything you do. But for the military, I believe that everyone shows up with two weights. And that's the way I looked at it, right? Like you show up to BMT, I was 6'2", 147 pounds when I showed up to BMT. And I retired 6'1", 142 pounds. No, not really. I don't know how I shrunk in 25 years. I got an inch shorter. But I showed up to BMT, and I think back on my TI, Staff Sergeant Williams, and I think that he really, and he had 100 people, 50, whatever we have in the BMT. But I think, did he really know who he had in front of him? Was 18 years old, it was September 1994, did he know who he had in front of him? He just knew he had another recruit he had to train, and that's okay. But did he know that Airman Basic Todd Simmons, Hardyville, South Carolina, coming in open general, is assigned to this squadron and this flight? That's who I was. But did he know that as 18-year-old, I've already failed the 4th grade, I've already failed the 9th grade, I'm a high school dropout, and I'm on a waiver to be in the Air Force? And I know some of y'all are thinking back to my introduction right now that I was the Air University Command Chief. Yes, your education was in really good hands. I grew, I promise you. But they didn't know that they had a kid who's already come from some horrific things that has happened to him personally, abuse, that I had no hope, I had no passion. I had no baseline of average. I didn't know what trust was. I didn't know what purpose was. I didn't know how to feel about even accomplishment. Did you know that? Did you know that from looking at me as this 6'2" airman? And I showed up every day to BMT, and I ran in the fastest group. I washed laundry in the laundry. I was a chapel guide. I had a big mask on. I just wanted to get through BMT the best I could. And I excelled. I actually, I came in as a waiver, scored today. They won't even let an airman in the United States Air Force on my ASVAB score. It's a true statement. Can't even join the Air Force in my 1993 ASVAB score. But I scored the highest on a test in my BMT flight. The first time I've ever achieved anything academically. And you know why? I was so afraid of failing in BMT. I was so afraid of them sending me home back to this environment. So when they said, break out your ATO and read it, I might have been the only airman reading it. When they say stand in formation and read your book, I was reading it. I might have read that thing 40,000 times. And I actually discovered one thing about myself. Man, it's hard for me to learn, but repetitive reading is actually some way I can learn things. That's the first time in my life that I've ever realized that I actually can achieve something. And you remember how we sat on the floor in day rooms? I'll never forget the day we sat on the floor in a day room and my TI looked at me and said, Simmons? And I said, yes, sir. He said, you got a 97 on this test? Then he said, I said, well, I don't know. And he's like, you did? He said, who'd you cheat off of? I'm like, what? You probably saw my ASVAB score. But I got a 97 on the BMT test, the highest in my flight. Because I learned how to learn that day. And I didn't even know I had a learning disability until I was 20-something years old. So I'm sitting here not understanding why I can't retain things, but if I read it 10,000 times, maybe I can. But my instructor didn't know that he had a self-doubt, insecure, shame, guilt 18-year in front of you. And guess what? You all are getting the same people with maybe not this much stuff in their rucksack. Maybe you're getting some airmen here with more stuff than this in their rucksack. Are you taking the time to meet them where they're at? There's people who are at least showing up with at least a 5-pound Beachbody dumbbell in there. They might not have some Greco weights in there like I may have showed up, but somebody at least got one of those little purple Beachbodies in the rug, and that's too heavy also. Think about walking around with, if I just told you to walk around with 5-pound weight attached to your belt 24 hours a day. That would get a little annoying after a while. Even that little 5 pounds. Some of your airmen are walking around with massive weight. And when I say airmen, I'm talking about the entire portfolio of people who are in the DOD or who are in the world, your family members, your kids. They're walking around with weight. And I always ask the audience the question, just think about what you're carrying every day. Family, decisions about serving, finances, failure. We talk about failure a lot. We always use these taglines here I see all over social media lately about fail forward, and we say all these things, but do we really create an environment and a culture and conditions for people to fail forward? I think we do and we don't. I think there's some areas that we do well, and there's some areas that we probably can set expectations for people into the right area. At Air University, I had the opportunity to speak at every school that we had, and enlisted schools more so for obvious reasons. And I'm actually going to be at the Senior NCO Academy on Tuesday. And there's 400 plus Master Sergeants in there. The reality that telling 400 Master Sergeants that they're all going to be chiefs is false. Just false. My first retirement that I went to in the United States Air Force was a staff sergeant when I was an airman. The best leader that I've ever had in the Air Force was a staff sergeant. Some of the best people who took me to war were 18-year tech surgeons. We got to set conditions of expectations that it's not personally about you. It's not personally about you. I tell you, time and space and a lot of luck got me to where my career went. But it didn't define that I was any better than the tech surgeon retirement that I went to, that I taught, who was a junior ROTC instructor in Texas right now, who was one of my troops. Doesn't mean I was better than him. I had different opportunities than he did. And then I may have taken advantage of those opportunities at the time. But it doesn't make me better, more. It doesn't make him less. We set conditions that humans are the best thing first. Everything else after that, we set the conditions to expect what you expect. So shame. Did I have a lot of shame? I couldn't read. First time I read my first book, I was 20 years old. Think about that. The first time I read a book other than the ATO at BMT, an actual commercial book. So you probably ask, who's asking how did I get through high school? I went through the last high school in the state of South Carolina. The last rated high school. My school, I had great teachers in that school who tried their best. But that school was a pass or pass school. If you showed up, you passed. If you didn't show up, you didn't pass. That was the requirement. If you did the work, you passed. If you showed up and didn't disrupt the class, you passed. So I was raised in that environment. And I still managed to fail 3 grades. Even in that environment. So taking a literature class, you're actually not taking a literature class. Taking a literature class, you're in a literature class. So the first book I read cover to cover was as a security forces area response team member out on the flight line. And for some of you as a defender here, you know you're not supposed to be reading on the flight line, I know, but I did. And it was the NCO who gave me a book, and I read that book cover to cover over about a week or 2. First book I ever read. 20 years old. Most people, including my 20 and 25-year-old daughter, can't fathom that. They can't even imagine when I tell them that. Like, what do you mean? You're 20, I'm 20. You mean at this point, you haven't read a book yet? My 20-year-old, she constantly gets like weirded out by that. She's like, I've read hundreds of books. Or she's a reader like her mom. I'm like, no, I was your age, and I read my first book. Why do I tell you that? And did I have shame that I didn't really know how to read or really comprehend the material? Yes. I tell you that because everyone carries something in them when it comes to shame. And you have to let people have grace and the space to be able to experience that. I remember that book, that NCO came to me a couple of times and said, hey, are you done with the book yet? I've never read a book. How do I know how long it takes to read a book? I have no time and no concept on what a 220-page book takes to read. So it's 2 weeks later, he's like, you finished with that book yet? I'm working on it. But he could have really crushed me at that point. But I think my responses really gave him the understanding that something ain't right here. Something ain't right here. So I finished the book, and he gave me another one, and I started sweating. And I'm like, okay, that was challenging. Now I got to read this book? And I never knew what that young staff sergeant, now retired OSI chief, who I still keep in contact with, was doing. He was educating me without even trying to add to my sheet. He knew that there will be a time, a space where this can be communicated. But now it's time for the grace to just continue to feed you what you need. And then when we get the space to talk about this, we'll be able to talk about it. And we'll be able to talk about it from a position of trust and a position of we have connected and I understand. And I'm here to help. We have to understand how powerful these tools are that we have when we talk about the superpowers of empathy. How powerful it is to connect with another human being on a level that changes their life. And I always credit him with changing my life. Because the fear that I had no mental discipline. I had a lot of fear. I was fear of, anybody heard the imposter syndrome? I was always in fear, number one, of being found out. Because I didn't really go to school. I didn't really graduate. I studied and studied. And the worst thing my career field ever did is put me up as a law enforcement desk sergeant. That's what we used to call them before, BDOC controller. So you're going to be a BDOC controller. So now you want me to type a blotter. Now you want me to talk on the radio. Now you want me to multitask. Now you want me to read stuff. And I head into Maxwell Air Force Base as my first assignment. Just think about this. 1995, I was Airman Basic at Maxwell Air Force Base. December 6, 2019, I retired from Maxwell Air Force Base as the command chief of Air University. I showed up here with my baggage probably a little bit lighter than that rucksack I showed you. A little bit lighter. I was confident. I actually came through BMT great. I actually went to tech school and did great. I actually came here to Fort Dix, New Jersey, minus a few, 20-degree shaves and some other things that happened here and running through injuries and stuff, so I don't have to stay here an extra 2 weeks. Other than all of that, I came through here very well. And I showed up to my first base as that enthusiastic airman that I talked about, that oath that I took. Everything about being in the United States Air Force, I was a believer. They actually used to call me Airman Run Through a Wall. That's what one of the Army staff sergeants used to call me. I had big homes and I had other, Airman Run Through a Wall. You know why they call me Airman Run Through a Wall? Why do you think they call me Airman Run Through a Wall? I'll run through a wall, they told me to. And that's what he told me when they said, Simmons, if I told you to run through that wall, what would you do? Staff Sergeant, I'll run through the wall. And he looked at me crazy, and I was like ready to go. If he would have said run through that wall, I was going to knock myself out on that wall. Because I wasn't going to make it through the 2x4s. Wasn't going to happen. But I was committed to this institution, like most of you showed up on day one. I was committed because it saved me. I had nothing to go back to. I tell people I showed up to BMT and they asked me, where's your bags? And I said, what do you mean? I'll never forget, I had on some red and white Nikes, some jean shorts, and a polo shirt, and I literally had another polo shirt. That's what I showed up to the Air Force with. I had a backpack. That was my stuff. That's what I showed up to the Air Force with. That was it. They were like, where's your stuff? I got my stuff. And I don't want to sound derogatory or nothing, but it took me a day to get here. I didn't have nothing but a polo shirt. So I didn't change some other things on my way to BMT. So I tell you, I was so happy when they issued us brown t-shirts. I was so happy when I got that uniform. I was so happy to be here. Nothing could derail what I felt that day. I still actually I can feel that feeling right now of what it meant to be in the United States Air Force and what it meant to somebody to treat me like Chick-fil-A. Because I felt like I was treated like Chick-fil-A. They respected I was an airman. They gave me this badge and this beret here at Fort Dix and told me I was somebody, even though nobody listened to me. They told me that this meant something. And remember, I wasn't a patriotic person who joined the Air Force. I just wasn't. That wasn't why I joined the Air Force. But I remember when they used to play Proud to be an American and all of, boy, I tell you, I would be crying like a 2-year-old baby, snot crying. I would be up in there crying, choked up. I didn't even know why. I just felt a certain type of way. I just felt that this thing was bigger than me. And I was a part of something special for the first time in my life. And I showed up to Maxwell Air Force Base, in process my squadron. They had this great thing. Who remember elite gate guard sections when people used to wear blues and ascots and all of these things? And I was tall and I was slim, and they said, we want you to be an ambassador elite gate guard. I said, absolutely, what is that? You're going to work 6-hour shifts. We're going to put your name on the gate. You're going to be having white gloves. And it's 98 degrees in Montgomery, Alabama, and it sounded great. Until I got out there, and I was like, it's 98 degrees out here. And I'm literally standing outside. In 1995, this is the Day Street Gate. It had no overhang. You were out there by yourself, and you were standing on that front gate, and you were just waving traffic. But I tell you, I have disability claim from shoulder rotations on. I got some bad shoulder rotation in this arm because, man, I used to be out there trying to break my arm. When you came to Airman Basic Simmons Gate and it said Airman Basic Simmons from Hardyville, South Carolina, man, you got one. I used to have a twisty twirl salute and all kinds of stuff. I used to come through that gate, man, I used to be able to come through, salute, tell you to go to the visitor center, look at 10 cars down to see who was in it. I was sharp. Had 6 pairs of white gloves every day I went to work because my white gloves could never be dirty. As soon as I saw a stain on my white gloves, bam, back. That's how committed I was. 120 days later, I had a rifle in my mouth. 120 days later, I was in a Caprice Classic like this, what we used to call a GAU, which now is an M4 type weapon. The shortened version of the M16A1 used to be called a GAU, but it basically looks like an M4, which we fire today. And the patrol car was Mike 2, was the patrol that guards reserve C-130s. 120 days at my first base, I had a rifle in my mouth. The issued rifle from the government. And I was in front of a C-130 with a rifle in my mouth, figuring out how did I take my life. 120 days. You're like, how did that happen in 120 days from this to holding a rifle in your mouth? So day 1, I'm having a rifle in my mouth. Day 2, they put me on the same post, which is the only post that you carry a rifle. So I thought it was okay, and you never get that post back to back. Never. You go from gate, you get a break, you sit on mic 2, watch some C-130s, then you go gate. So they gave me that post twice in a row, and I just said, okay, now I put a round in the trigger, and I put the trigger on fire, and I start doing trigger pull with the rifle in my mouth. Pulling the trigger, and I fired a lot of weapons since that day, and I fired a lot of my own personal weapons, and I will tell you, I don't know how I'm still here, because when I was slowly pulling that trigger, and it scared me so bad, I took my finger off the trigger. And if you know anything about pressure on a trigger, it's 1 milliliter, essentially. I mean, it's just, you don't know when the click's gonna happen. And I was halfway to the click, and then nothing had happened, and I just took my hand off. And I'm thankful that that weapon didn't fire every day. And I panicked, and I got out of this car, and I ran around the C-130, left the rifle in the car, and just ran to the back of the C-130, and got on my knees, and I'll never forget, and just crying. I did not know what to do. How did I get there? I showed up to a base when Master Sergeant Rodriguez put me on this amazing opportunity. And I will tell you, within 60 days of being on that gate, I was engaged for my first time. I didn't get married. But it was just a great opportunity to be on this gate. You were very visible. Everybody wanted to see you. And Master Sergeant Rodriguez gave me a great opportunity to be on this gate section as a brand new airman. And I believed in everything that I was doing. And one day, I show up to my squadron in my 1985 Celica with no air conditioning in the summer in Alabama. That's all I could afford, $3,200, and they said no AC sold. And I showed up to my car proud to have this vehicle. And I'm in this mirror, because in this mirror, in this squadron, you're elite ambassador gate guard, so you gotta look pristine every day. They had this huge mirror with a cutout of a male and a cutout of a female on each side in blues. And this is how you look. They look mean, they look stern, they got the beret right in the center of the crest. They just look like this. You know, we just look ready. And you're there, you're trying to look ready like the picture. And I'm looking ready, and I'm ready. My ascot actually is cutting my neck, it's so sharp. I got so much stay flow and duct tape and everything else in that thing. But I'm sitting here getting ready, and I hear voices in the break room. And I'm being honest with you. I don't hold anything back on my story. I heard voices in the break room. One of them is Manny, who's my senior airman supervisor, who picked me up from the airport, gave me a dorm room I thought was a solid citizen. And I trusted him. And he's talking to two other gentlemen in the break room. And they're talking, and I'm just there. And back in 1995, security police, not forces, was broken up into 3 career fields. And I was law enforcement. I wasn't security, I was law enforcement. So I was in the 42nd Security Forces Squadron. And I'll be honest, it wasn't a very diverse squadron. But in 1995, I didn't know what diversity was. I was happy to have a job. I just wanted to have a job, people treat me fairly, I feel like I'm at Chick-fil-A. But I hear these 3 men talking in the room, and I'm getting dressed, and I'm outside in the hallway. They can't see me. And I hear someone says, I feel sorry for you that you have to supervise all 3 of them. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then he started explaining more that the 3 of them was me, Tanisha, and Clayton, the only 3 African-American airmen on that flight. A1C, A1C, 1 striper. I'm like, first of all, I didn't even know my supervisor supervised all 3 of us. That's not my business. I'm a brand new airman. And then they started talking about Clayton is a thug. Now he needs to go. It's being real. And I'm like, Airman Clayton, okay. And then they said Tanisha. I said, what about her? Oh man, which one of us are going to sleep with her first? Then they said, what about Simmons? Like, we don't know about him yet. He's too new. You have to know my environment that was what was in my rucksack 6 months before this conversation. This is where I'm talking about the seriousness of knowing your people. In my rucksack, I brought in distrust. I brought in insecurity. I brought in a lifestyle before I came in that was not good. That you just didn't trust people in that environment. I, for the first time in my adult life at 19 years old now, lowered my guard and trusted this institution that told me that they had me. From proud to be an American to everything. I'm thinking back, big homes, little homes. I'm thinking back, all of this stuff I believed came crashing down the second I'm 19. And I, at this point, have read 1 book, and that's the Air Force book. I don't have a grasp on what's going on because I learned how to survive prior to the military. If someone wanted to come at me, I knew how to survive. If someone wanted to attack me, I knew how to survive. I knew how to get through high school without doing high school work. I knew how to do these things. In this new environment, what am I going to do? Walk in there and fight 3 men? Am I going to identify that I'm here? Am I going to say, I don't like this? I don't have that knowledge. I don't have that. I just don't have it. I'm fearful. So what do you think happens over the next 2 months to 120 days when my supervisor came to my gate? What do you think changed in Airman Simmons' personality? Everything. It went from happy to see his patrol car show up to my gate. It went from, man, I could not wait to see him, to every time he came to my gate, I got a little bit less vocal. To a point where he came to my gate and he said, how you doing, Simmons? And I'm like, yes, sir. Like everything was yes, sir. Even questions that don't require yes, sir. Like, it's hot today, yes, sir. It's cold today, yes, sir. And it got to the point where I could not make eye contact with him anymore. And it got to a point where the paranoia slipped in of who's coming after me. And I can't control this anymore, because if I was 17 and you came after me, don't let me catch you outside. But I don't want to be that person anymore. I'm not that person. The Air Force has re-blued me into this airman. So how do I fight? How do I speak up? How do I look around and who can I trust? I can't trust anybody, because everyone around me can be the person creeping in the hallway talking. That's what the stories that I started telling myself. The story I told myself is, oh my goodness, somebody's going to come after me. And they're going to take everything away from me, and I'm not going to be an airman anymore. I'm going to go home. I'm going to have nothing. And I kept telling myself deeper stories until I couldn't sleep and I started panicking. And I talk about trust a lot when we trust save lives. So day 1, day 2, I'm trying to take my life. Day 3, I'm on break. And day 3, I'm in a phone booth calling the one person I knew to trust. My mom. And I told her, if you don't come get me in 3 hours, I'm killing myself. What an unfair statement to a woman who's never traveled beyond 3 states. From a small town with 1 traffic light. If you don't come get me, I'm going to kill myself. And of course, she doesn't know how to handle this situation. So I hang up the phone and I commence to tearing this phone booth apart. Everybody's been in the phone booth, not everybody. Most of us have been in the phone booth. Big statement in this room. Well, if you've been in the phone booth, what does it say? How do you get out of a phone booth? Most of them you pull, right? I was pushing. So I broke all the glass off the phone, out of the phone booth, cut my arms up. I actually have scars on my right arm right now that I covered up with tattoos to remind me. And I'm bloody, and I'm bloody. I'm bloodied up. I'm just tearing this glass out of this phone booth. I'm bloody. I'm tearing the receiver off, everything. And I've told this story to probably, I don't know, a couple of thousand first sergeants. Who's the first sergeant here? Have you heard me talk about this, sir? I might have missed your class. So my first sergeant is doing a dorm walkthrough at the time that I'm commencing to tearing this phone booth up. And this is 1995, and the language in the Air Force was not what the language is right now. Just being real. People said different things to you. And I tell you, I was tearing this phone booth up, and I saw my shirt, and he came in and he said, hey, calm down, what's going on? Or he didn't say what's going on. He just said, hey. And he looked at me, and I had this frantic look, I'm sure, and he asked me the most important 3 words that anybody asks me. He said, hey, how can I help? As simple as that. How can I help? I don't trust anybody. He absolutely doesn't know me. I've only been in the squadron a couple of months. How can I help? And it disarmed me. And it disarmed me for enough time for him to have me sit down and stop breathing fast, get my breath, and just be there in silence until I got myself together. And I started calming down, and I started looking at this shirt for the man he was, this senior master sergeant. And I remember staring at him to this day, and just like I say VHS for whatever you rewind back in the day. So it's VHS tapes for me. I'm old. And I remember rewinding every interaction that I had with this man. Every interaction. From the time I got to this squadron. And I'm looking at him, and it might have went on for a couple of minutes, and I remembered my first interaction with my first sergeant is what all of you do. You know, we come in, and we take their names, and we get their records and stuff straightened out. The shirt basically got all my stuff straightened out. And I remember the question he asked me as I was leaving his office. He said, "Who's the most important person in your life, Airman Simmons?" I said, "What?" He said, "Who's the most important person in your life?" And I said, "My mom." Just nonchalantly said my mom and kept it moving. He lived on Gunner Air Force Base, and I would be on the gate at Gunner sometime, and he would come through. If a car was behind him, he would yell out the window, "Simmons," or whoever was at the gate. And he would stop sometimes if he had time to stop. What do you think the question that he asked every time he stopped before he left? What do you think he asked? "How's your mom?" Chick-fil-A. "How's your mom?" He was building that currency with me that we both did not know that would need to be withdrawn today. So when I did that, a mental assessment with him, I went, "I'll let you in." They wanted to take me to mental health treatment teams and all of this stuff, and I said, "I'll do whatever you want as long as my shirt's there." As long as my shirt's there. I don't want, and at this point, I didn't tell anybody what I heard in the hallway. Who do you think the first person they want to show up and take me somewhere? My supervisor. I said, I need a shirt. I would rather have the shirt. I would rather have the shirt take me. Believability. You cannot have believability without connection. You cannot have believability without curiosity. You cannot have believability without grace. It just doesn't work. If that wasn't the person who walked into that dorm that night, I don't know where I would be today. It could have went completely different. But it happened to be the person who invested just enough in me to save me. Not influence me, to save me. I'm going to bypass that one. And then we talk about vulnerability. How many of you are comfortable being vulnerable? All right, couple. About to get a chance. It's all about relatability and vulnerability. So I do a lot of workshops with 50 people and all this stuff, a lot of stuff in corporate training. I never do introductions in the room. I never do introductions. It's weird. I'll come in and I'll just start teaching. They'll be like, "Well, you don't want to go around the room and learn who everybody is?" I don't want your 3 to 5 things. Just don't want it. I have no interest in knowing the 3 things right now. I want it to be authentic. I will meet everyone. I will meet everyone before we're done with this. That's my statement to people. But I'm going to give you a chance to be vulnerable. I've done this with 1,000 people in the room. It's pretty interesting. I want you to stand up and find somebody next to you. Got to find at least one person. And I want you to just say this statement one at a time. If you really knew me, you would know that. Whatever you want to know. It can be as simple as, if you knew me, you would know that I'm a secret Alabama fan. I just don't want to tell people that because I'm from Tennessee. If that's your thing, I mean, if you want to disclose that today, I will. That's actually a big thing, right? But because vulnerability is really hard. Just think about the A1C from Philadelphia that I was talking to. What if I just would have responded to her on the 19th time I talked to her? You know what, Ellen? If you knew me, you would know that I tried to take my own life when I was 19. And I had such mental depression because of an incident in the squadron. And, this is how I got back to my trusted space. I could have just said that. But it's hard for us to say that. I mean, I'm a chief math surgeon. I'm like, I can't say that. That's contrary to my wall. I got problems. But it doesn't have to be negative. How many of you have a hobby? I remember, Chief Wright, laughed at me on a podcast he did one time when I told him I like making lamps. And he just laughed for like 4 minutes. And I thought that was very rude. But we laugh about that all the time. I'm like, hey, actually, that's what I like, making lamps. And he just laughed on a live podcast for 4 straight minutes. And I was like, that's not funny. That's what gives me my peace. I don't sell them, I just give them away to friends. But it doesn't have to be every time something heavy. who do I know that now starts a connection with each other? So I'm gonna give you about 3 minutes. Ready? Go. You gotta stand up to do this too. You just can't do this. And you build a connection with people you don't even know. One of my good friends in Annandale, Virginia right now is about 75-year-old man who's a woodworker and a carver, and I go in the store and I'm just like, I feel like Cheers when I go in there. I'm just, I'm retired, I kind of got my own schedule, and I just go up in there and I want to learn from him. I want to hear his stories. But if I just went in there and became a customer, I never would have connected with that person. If I didn't need something beyond the customer, like, hey, I'm about to burn my house down. Like my wife said, no more lamps in the house. Like, and I'm afraid that I got these lamps in my friend's house and that I'm gonna get sued. And he said, well, let me show you. And it started with a conversation that started talking about his life. And it started with a conversation that started talking about my life. And our lives cannot be any way in the same if you just put it on paper. But what connects us is that we are two human beings who love life. We love the fact that he's overcome some things, I've overcome some things, and how do you move through life with purpose, passion, and persistence? And that's what we talk about. You don't have to have this finite thing that bonds you because we're both staff sergeants, so we gotta talk. I'm a civilian, you're in the military, we can't really talk. No, we're all humans at the core of who we are. That's what we came in as, and that's what we're gonna leave here as. So the connection piece is very important in what we talked about. And it's all about what do you know about me, right? So I finish off with a little bit about empathy. I do a 2-hour class on empathy, and I can't go anywhere without talking about empathy, because I truly believe that's what saved my life, right? And I talk about the 3 empathetic principles, and I talk about the cognitive, the emotional, and the empathetic concern, but what I really talk about is in that black box. What does that first sergeant do to me? That first sergeant he saw through my eyes, he listened, and he felt what I felt. He gave me grace. He could have used all kind of 4-letter words. He could have said a whole lot of things to me. He paused. He paused. And he just allowed the situation to mature. And he allowed me to get grasp on who I was talking to and do I trust you. All of these things was going on back and forth in silence without anybody knowing. When we jump in sometimes and start judgment, and we jump in sometimes and we start giving the answers, and we jump in sometimes without the authority to really know who you were giving advice to. I used to tell people all the time. People would be like, hey, Chief, can you come look at my records? And I'll be honest with you, I used to deny a lot of people. And not because I'm some super chief you can't talk to, because I used to tell you, I don't have the authority yet to tell you what to do with your career. I only have this positional authority that you see me with all these chevrons. I'm one of 2,800 of these people in the Air Force. I might not be the chief to give you that advice. So what you can do is you can get on my calendar and you can come spend an hour with me and we can talk as human beings. Maybe I'll look at your records 3 times from now. But you're not going to show up to my office with a folder and be transactional. Because I don't know you and you don't know me. And if you just want me to tell you how to get promoted, I'll email that to you. We don't need to talk. I don't want to waste your time. And I don't want to waste my time. If you just want to know how to get promoted, I'll email you a checklist. If you want to make a connection in life, and if you want to talk, if you want to just let whatever flows, and I can know how to better help you based on who you are uniquely as a human being in this time, in this space, then you can come to my office all day. If you want a transactional checklist, I'll email it to you, and I wish you luck in everything that you do. But empathy, just think about a little empathy in feedbacks, a little empathy in conversations, a little seeing truly. You know, we all want something, right? I would tell you right now, there's probably 3 times in my career where I probably should not have been doing what I've been doing. I talk to the NCO academies a lot, and I show a slide at the NCO academy, and I talk about person 1, and I talk about person 2. And I don't care what the NCO academy, I always get them with this slide. And I say, hey, person 1, you know, this is a person dealing with all of these things. How do you lead this person as a tech sergeant? Then I go, person 2, this is
you're high performing. This person had Levato, did all these great things, graduated from FBI Academy, is a college professor. I make these two people so different. And what do you think the person with all the problems, probably about 40, 50%, I'm not blaming our NCOs for this, it's just a perception, right? This person with all the problems, they get a little bit like, we might have to do something about that person, we might have to do all of this. Well, just without even knowing, just a screenshot of what this person may be going through. Then the high performing NCO, what do you think is always 90% the answer? Hands off. Man, that's a go-getter. I'll figure out how to challenge that person a little more. All these great, the whole audience lights up on this person. And then I show them slide 3. What do you think slide 3 is? A picture of me. I'm both of these people. I was NCO of the year 2004 and 2005, and when I almost was going through a divorce, I was severely depressed, and I was trying to get out of the Air Force. And I was the NCO of the year. But every time they came to me and went, man, great job, Sergeant Simmons, great job, and man, you're killing it, we're gonna give you some more. What did I do? I'm like, I can't say anything, because if I say anything, I'm gonna lose my place in line. Right now, I'm first in line. If I say something, I'm gonna now maybe be 4th or 5th. I remember I became the youngest tech sergeant in the history of the Air Force, even to this day, to be selected to go to the FBI Academy. The security forces sent a couple of people a year. And I'm the youngest enlisted, I'm the only tech sergeant ever to be selected. I remember it was a great day. They told me I was gone. I was severely depressed. I wanted to tell my chief so bad, oh man, this 3 months, I ain't ready for this 3 months. Like mentally, I'm not ready. Like I'm just not in a place. Made master immediately my first time, right in the middle of all of this great stuff going on. People are telling you how great I am. And I suffered through, and I'm being really honest, because there's people in this room, I feel blessed to have survived. First as a 19-year-old, and I feel blessed to have survived and still have a family and to be able to retire from the United States Air Force as a chief, because for tech sergeant to chief master sergeant, I wore a serious mask to get there. And I was willing to not be first. And the only thing that probably saved my life through those years is that I knew what it felt like to be on the end. I knew what hopelessness felt like. So I knew if I ever felt somewhat like that, I would go get help. I went to mental health, and I've had every acronym under my care. So I tell people I've been to BHOP, I've been to MFLAC, I've been to mental, I've been to everything. Because I'm a proponent of mental health care. What saved me to retire at 25 years is the fact that I always was in a chaplain's office. I always was invested in some type of mental health for myself. And I still barely got by sometimes. But I got by until I took ownership of my life. And that's why I talk about empathy. So I'm gonna go through these relatively quick. And I like to tell a story about how, things. And I talked about this a little bit at the Air Force Ball, but you guys didn't, who was at Air Force Ball? You didn't get to see her picture, though. So this is Staff Sergeant Arlinda Halidi. And Sergeant Halidi is stationed in Hickam, of course, you see it. But why is that so relevant to this conversation I talked about the Air Force Ball a little bit? Where's Camp Liberty? 5 miles down the road, 10 miles down the road? The refugee camp you guys have, 10,000 people in it or something like that? 1995, after I got through 1999, after I got through everything and I PCS'd away from Maxwell, I went to RAF Lakenheath, where I started my 17-year journey overseas, consecutive. And I went to Bosnia, and for the sake of time, I'll shrink the story. I went to Bosnia on one of my second or third deployments, and we were in Bosnia, and we were flying to Kosovo, and we were all over the place. And I tell you, in 1999, Sergeant Halidi, and we won't make the story long, it's a longer story. She was walking in Kosovo. If you remember what was happening in the Balkans, it was ethnic cleansing going on. She was walking with her family from this Kosovo village, and they were basically in danger of being killed. And they went to a NATO refugee camp. So why I talk about Sergeant Halidi is because right down the street is a refugee camp, right? You don't know today the impact of what you're doing. You know the stress of what you're doing. You don't know the impact yet, some of you. 1999, I was a snot-nosed senior airman. I didn't care about much but eating and going to sleep in my tent. Two concerns I had. But in 1999, I was over there doing convoys and all of these different things and flying on C-130s. And what the unique story about connection, why I make you do that connective exercise, is I was at Hickam on my last day on active duty, speaking at the chief induction ceremony to bring chiefs in on my last day. That was a pretty awesome one-off opportunity. And I went to talk to their FTAC, and I saw Sergeant Halidi in the corner, and I went and talked to her. And what did she give me? The 3 to 5 things. I'm Sergeant Halidi, I'm a 4N, I'm an NCOIC, an FTAC. I love what I do. Great. And we started talking, and I had 17 minutes to talk to her. 17 minutes. In those 17 minutes, again, was really 2-year-old snot crying. What I found out in 1999 is she was walking with her family because I pulled the string on her. We had a connection. We can talk until we found the intersecting point that we both kind of went, aha. When she was walking with her family at 4 years old, I was a senior airman visiting all those NATO refugee camps. I never met her, probably never met her family. But man, did that give me some purpose and impact of why I served. Here's a young lady who was in a NATO refugee camp at 4. A Catholic charity sponsored her family to come to the United States. And at 18 years old, she did nothing more than want to join the United States Air Force. Now she's a 4N, now she's a staff sergeant in the United States Air Force, now she's leading our airmen. All through probably a connection that she kept in her mind somewhere. That's how powerful that is. And what she gave me is something I honestly almost forgot about, because that was another war so long ago. It gave me purpose of why I serve. It brought back to airmen coming through the gate, Airman Simmons coming back through the gate. I will not talk about Airman Washington, but I'll talk about airmen, I'll talk about empathetic concern, and I'll close it out there. Do you know how to lead me? And I'll finish with this one story. I talked about that first sergeant, and I kind of left it there, and we talk about what the power of connecting and being curious, being an empathetic person, how that changes lives. That first sergeant who guided me through that incident in 1995, I have not spoken to that first sergeant since 1996, to this day. That first sergeant walked in, who are the officers in here, sir? So I'm going to ask you a question, put you on the spot. I won't put the colonel on the spot. Put a captain on the spot. That's what you do to captains. So after I got my weapon back and got through everything I was doing, my first sergeant was going to Khobar Towers. Everybody heard of Khobar? Khobar Towers, Saudi Arabia, and he was going to deploy. There were 2 airman slots to Khobar Towers for our squadron. As a captain, if your first sergeant, I'm going to ask you this, I'm sorry. If the first sergeant come to your office and say, hey, I'm going to Khobar Towers, I want to take Airman Simmons with me, what do you say? Airman Simmons, who just tried to kill himself 2 months ago.
So I know the backstory?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it. I would try to see if there's someone else who could go first.
And that's a fair answer. Every officer I ask, you know what? Even I probably wouldn't have sent me. But that young major said he trusted his shirt. And he let his shirt take a kid who just tried to kill himself 2 months ago to Khobar Tower, Saudi Arabia, to work in security forces. When I got there, my shirt was not my shirt. He was supposed to be the cop shirt, and they sent him to maintenance. So now I'm like, okay, this is not cool. This is the guy I've leaned on, and I'm like crutched a little bit because I trusted him. And you know what that shirt did? Even though he led a very complex maintenance squadron, every day I had off, he came and picked me up in a red F-150 and took me to a Chinese restaurant, the same Chinese restaurant down in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, every time. And we talked about nothing that really was going on, just talked. Building that currency. And on the last time that we met at this Chinese restaurant, he pulled out this napkin. Not this particular one, but a 2-cent napkin. And he wrote down 8 bases, and he explained to me for 2.5 hours all of those bases. And they all were overseas. And he looked at me, and that's the first time that he ever said what I needed to do. Remember that authority that I just talked about? Remember that said that people thought I was being offensive by not wanting to to look at their records right away. For 3 months, he never asked me anything, but just let me talk. And now he's going to tell me the one thing that he thinks that I need to do. And he said, go overseas. And we got back home, and I filled my dream sheet out. In 380 days from the day I showed up at that gate that I showed you, I was headed to RAF Lakenheath as an A1C. And 17 years later, I came back from overseas as a senior master sergeant with a wife and 2 kids. Because for 17 years, I followed a napkin from a man I didn't speak to from 1996. Had a chief come up to me and said, you need to go to Ramstein to be a Ramstein Elite Guard when they had it. What a great opportunity for a cop. Oh, we're going to Alaska. Beach kid from South Carolina going to Alaska. I trusted a person from 1996 to guide my entire career, who I never spoke to again. When we talk about the things of connectiveness and the things of truly being an empathetic leader and truly being someone who's willing to lower the veil of vulnerability, we're talking about change here, people. Now we start talking about moving from climate to an actual culture where people feel valued, they feel like they're eating Chick-fil-A every day. That's my time. I know I only got 4 minutes, so I probably take 1 or 2 questions. But I will tell you what I want to leave you with. It's a lot, right? I've done this for 2-3 hours. This is 90 minutes. If I can give you one takeaway from today, is that it doesn't matter if you're here as the only person from your organization, the only person from your squadron, the only person from your shop. You got something today, hopefully, that you think about how to go back and infuse throughout every person in your life. Not just professionally, but personally. And if it's one thing I want you to take away from here is as you stand up and walk away and look at the person that you're walking in front of, you see them as a human being. You see them as somebody who is in this fight just like you, regardless if they wear this uniform or not, if they're a family member at the BX, they're a little 4-year-old at the CDC. We're all in this. And to treat each of us with that dignity and respect, to treat each of us with that level of humility makes us all better. It makes your children better, it makes your spouses better, it makes your partners better, it makes your organization better. No one wants to step through the threshold of anything that makes them not feel valued. So if you have a mindset that from the time I get up in my neighborhood to go to my community center, from the time I walk into BX, how can I influence positivity in this life? You can influence so many people. So out of everyone in this room, there's actually 1 million people in this room, because that's the connection power that you have to change. Remember, I laminated a napkin and carried it around for 17 years. And the only reason I came back to the United States of America as an active duty member is because I had a sophomore going into her junior year in high school and has never went to American high school. It's the only reason we came back. Because I wanted her to go to the University of Alabama. And she did. And she graduated in 5 years, not 4. But I will end with one serious thing that I really want to leave you with. Roll Tide.